Rick, welcome to the Seven
Hey,
Hats.
listen, I have been looking forward to this for so long. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Rick, by all measures, you're a successful entrepreneur. You know, the Chinese have a saying, may you live in interesting times. And from what I know of your story, you've lived in interesting
I have.
times. And you have a lot of stories and aha moments that I'm sure that can be shared with the Seven Hatters. So since there is so much I want to ask, I'd like to just get right into it, if that's okay with you.
Perfect.
Okay. First question is, where were you born and how was your childhood?
Yeah, I tell people that I was not born and raised in Eastern Kentucky. I was born in the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. Pretty quickly after my birth father divorced with my mom, she moved when I was just a few weeks old back to Appalachia. So I grew up, for all intents and purposes, in a holler in Eastern Kentucky. Grew up there with my mom and brother and mom and dad, and had a great upbringing. I tell people, you've all that it's that nice little combination of hillbilly elegy and Friday Night Lights. So if you're a book reader, two great books. If you're a movie watcher, listen, J.D. Vance did a great job with Hillbilly Elegy, and Ron Howard took the book and created an amazing movie. But if you look at how those things play out, in both cases, it really was just this interesting, time, birth to 18, of growing up in a culture that really sticks with you. The culture that made me who I am today, that sticks with me. But knowing growing up in a holler that you could see daylight between 10 and 3 because the sun went over the mountains, when it came up and went down, all the way through having that lineage of coal miners in your background. My dad worked on the railroad for 37 years, and his dad had a little bit of coal mining in him. My mom's dad had a little bit of black lung in there. My brother still works in the coal mines today. His younger brother, great man, very proud of him. But listen, he's mining metallurgical coal so that we can have steel processed. So that's part of who I am and who I was growing up. But I tell people that story in that I am who I am today through the culture. But if you met me for the first time, you'd never know or think that I grew up in the head of a holler in Eastern Kentucky. But it is very much who I am
Wow.
today.
Wow. From my limited exposure, mostly from Lisa Ling's reporting,
Yeah.
Appalachia is some of the most beautiful, like you said, and most desperate countryside in the U.S. On one hand, you got the Great Smokies, and on the other hand, you have a terrible epidemic of joblessness and, I believe, substance abuse. I recall you mentioning once that there was also some substance abuse within your family. Is that correct?
No. In my case, I'm one of the rare people that when you hear the stories of Hillbilly Elegy and you watch that movie, that I did not have substance abuse. Now, the tough part is that my dad was an alcoholic. Everyone's best friend was not violent, but he ended up dying in his 60s of cirrhosis of the liver. And, my dad drank with all my friends, and everyone, from the time I remember growing up, everyone had a beer in their hand. And so I think the analogy that people use from 60s and 70s when I grew up versus the way people would numb today is that you can drink alcohol for 40, 50 years and it may kill you, but substance abuse can be 40, 50 days and you're dead. And so I grew up in that era of time. There's a lot of alcohol, a lot of drinking, but very much social, part of the fiber. But in my case, I always felt that was different. Part of it was my faith. The other aspect, I thought I was going to be a pro football player, but I was, 50 pounds too light, 6 inches too short, but man, I thought I could do it. So I wanted every advantage I could have to be healthy, focused, be able to perform, and really just didn't want to go down that path. But it was all around me. All of my buddies are drinking and partying all the time because what are you going to do after working hard day? You're going to sit down with your buddies and drink and kind of just numb yourself. And so there's a lot of that around me. Now, on the other side of things, the question is, how are you going to get out, right? How are you going to pursue? And then there's really a couple of facets. There's education, or the sports. I knew I wasn't going to make it in sports. I knew education was going to be the route for me, and made it to the University of Kentucky. And after a year of struggling as this little hillbilly in a very preppy world, now, Yuval, these are the days where the guys had 3 polo shirts flipped up, mattress shorts. It was just, and I'm this kid that's going to university, and I had a Who concert T-shirt, I had a football jersey, a baseball jersey, a pair of jeans, and white high-top Converse tennis shoes. And I'm in a world of preppiness and button downs, and so I realized it didn't fit up. And so one life lesson that I learned, and this is for your listeners, is that I believe that success really follows the path and depths of relationships. And for me, as a freshman on this floor, have my twangy accent, the way I dressed, I had a group of guys that really came around me and respected me and loved me and encouraged me for who I was. And most of them had joined fraternities. Now, Yuval, I was not a fraternity guy. I watched Animal House, and I didn't want either one of those, right? But I made a really good group of guys, and I thought, well, I could do this. And this friend of mine, Mark King, and I'll never forget Mark, he pulled me aside. He said, Rick, we've got to do something about how you dress. I said, okay. So he took me to the mall. And think of the kind of like a Macy's. This at the time it was called like doll hairs. He took me to the mall and bought me a pair of Bass Weejan shoes, fantastic loafers, right? A pair of duckhead khakis, which are fantastic. A white button down, a blue button down, a blue blazer, and 2 ties. And he said, okay, with this, you'll be able to go through the process and end up in the Greek system. Had I not had an 18-year-old boy in college take another 18-year-old boy in college to the mall to go shop, I wouldn't be where I am today. And so those relationships of having someone come alongside you to say, you need to dress differently. I mean, I could fast forward to getting ready to interview and people saying, gosh, you're mispronouncing these words and your twang is too tight. You need to enunciate. And you need to not use those words or you're never going to get hired. And that's really hard, Yuval, for someone to say, you just can't talk that way and you can't dress that way. And so that was my early upbringing to get out. But once I get out, the story had just begun because I needed relationships to help me grow as a young man to proceed in my career.
Yeah. And we'll touch upon relationships in a second. So you're kind of the oddball, right? Out of a place where most of the country has no idea even exists. No. And none. You're going into a university, which basically is a melting pot from all over the country. And now you're not really fitting in. But going back to your parents and family members, did they want you to be in the coal mining business? Did they want you? Because it's kind of hard taking a chance leaving when you know you're going to have a salary, right?
It was difficult. So let's use peers. So I'm a senior in high school. I'm graduating in May, and I had several friends saying, it was Ricky at the time. I'm Rick, but it was Ricky. So Ricky helped me understand. You're going to go to college, pay for 4 years of college, and you're going to hope to make $18,000, $20,000 a year. You're going to hope you make that. This is back in the 80s. He said, Ricky, right now, I'm making $40,000 a year, 2x what you're ever going to make. I've already got a brand new Corvette. I got a brand new motorcycle. And I'm already living in this double wide trailer up here on this piece of property. You're nuts. It makes no sense at all. Now, for my dad, he looked at it as like, listen, you need a good job. You could come work on the railroad. You're smart. You could progress up. But both of them wanted me and my brother to go out and to get the education. I'm a first generation guy to get an education in my family. My brother he said, school's not for me. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stay here. He worked for a mining supply company, then an oil company, and then eventually started working in the mines. But it's very much a proud job. It's a proud way of the culture to be a part of that.
Of course.
But my mom and dad wanted me to move on if I could. The problem was that first year, I thought I am way over my head. I made all A's in high school, couple of B's that we could talk about that I didn't deserve. That's another story for another day. But I get into college and realize in chemistry, in the first week, they covered everything that I'd covered in high school. In calculus, in the first 2 weeks, they covered everything that I covered. And all of my other friends in those classes, it was almost like a refresher course. I was so far behind, didn't know how to study, culturally was trying to get accepted in that. And so the family wanted me to go. But after that first semester, I really thought I was just going to quit and go back and get a job in the mines and get a job on the railroad. I didn't think I could make it.
What stopped you from quitting?
Part of it goes back to the culture. I'd never quit anything in my life. And I finally realized, you may kick me out. You may tell me I can't come back, but I am not going to quit. I'm going to make a go of this. And thank goodness I did. The next semester was great. I ended up meeting my wife there. I mean, the fraternity, but it gets like those pivotal times in your life where you realize everything's falling apart. All the pressure's there. It was so comfortable at home. Just move right back in. I'm the guy, the captain of the football team. I mean, everyone knew me. You go, it's like the Cheers bar, right? You go in and everyone knows who you are. To go back into that big entity, that big machine, because I just wasn't going to let it beat me. I was not going to quit.
So you were a big fish in a small pond. All of a sudden, you found yourself tremendous. in a big pond. Very difficult. So what was the impetus to succeed? Was it just hard work? Because obviously you weren't as qualified as some of the other students who came in, and that was a big mountain to climb. So, and I think if I would guess, I think your answer is going to be related to why you're so successful now or have been so successful. But the question is, what was it that got you to that next level, got you to stay in school and not get kicked out?
What I started to realize, and it was really about the second semester, is that once you started getting into some of the classes that weren't weed out classes, and you're actually having conversations, and it's the old adage of, gosh, bless that guy's heart, he couldn't get out of the rain if he had to. I mean, it just like, oh my gosh. I started to realize I was just as competent. I was just as smart. I just didn't have 18 years of preparation. But it took me to have some non-classroom interaction to realize not only can I hang with these guys, I don't know how they're getting out of the rain. I mean, I realized that all the 18 years of preparing me to be a get-it-done guy, the work ethic associated with it, the fact that you had no fear, you could take on you could take on anything. I started to feel the momentum, and I realized, it's just the preparation. If I lowered my head, I can do this. Now, the problem was, by the time I figured that out, I really didn't have good study habits, didn't understand it. When my girlfriend, now wife, came to school, really kind of had that heart-to-heart with me saying, you got to start studying. You can't just study the night before. You have to start prepping. And I had a professor starting to pour into me saying, you've got it, but you're not really putting in the effort. I mean, think about it, Yuval. I'd never taken a final in high school because I aced everything. Why take a final? Yeah. And so now all of a sudden you're having this culmination of work over 3 months, and they're testing what I've learned. I realized I didn't learn anything. I just passed it. And so this realization of, wow, this is going to make a difference long term. I really need to start studying and preparing. And then I started treating it in my head. And again, this is just the football guy. I could tell you every mannerism, every play, exactly what was happening before the next football game, because I watched film when I was a student. I said, my goodness, I can treat class the same way. So I just had a different kind of that light bulb switched, and I got confidence again. It was really the first time in my life that I didn't have confidence to say, I'm the guy, I can do this, I have no fear. I was feeling the pressure, and I really had a confidence issue. And it just started to turn that second semester. By the third semester of my sophomore year, I was on. I was in. I had confidence again. I'm driving home. I'd been home all summer long working on a mining supply truck, which reinforced why I didn't want to go back home. I had new impetus, and I really started driving things home.
Wow. So you got college under control. You're ready to graduate. What were your job prospects like at that time? And how did you land a preeminent consumer goods company like P&G. Did you know anything about CPG at that time? Did anybody warn you about this industry?
No, so here's that tells you how old I am. I know I look really young on the screen. If people could see me, you're listening, you can just see me how young Rick really is. But it was in the days it's pre-internet, and the internet wasn't around 30 years ago, right? You couldn't just Google P&G. And what I also realized was I didn't really understand even what the interview process was going to look like. But it goes back to that relationship piece. I had a fraternity brother that was wicked smart, great GPA, nailed everything, got a job at P&G. And he was our president. He came back in for a visit, and he said, you'd be perfect for P&G. Here's what they're looking for. Natural born leaders. People have variety of skills, multiple jobs, great GPA. Now, in those days, I had 3 GPAs, you've all ready? 3. I had an overall GPA of 3.0. I went from engineering to business, so I had a business GPA of 3.5, but in my major, I had a 4.0. And so when I pitched to P&G, I had 3 GPAs listed, which was, they said he'd never, ever seen a 3 GPA guy before. I had 3 GPAs. But through that relationship, he said, you should, send in an application. I'm like, well, what do I do? He literally sent me a form in the mail. I hand wrote on the form, mailed it into this corporate machine. And because of a letter of recommendation from him, they said, hey, why don't you drive up for an interview? It was an hour and a half away. So I'm here in a blue blazer and khakis. I have to go buy a wool suit. I've got to go buy wingtips. I mean, oh my goodness. Seriously, I had to buy wingtips. I had to buy a pinpoint cotton shirt that would starch up, and I had to buy a red tie. So I had my interview suit ready. I had to go buy I didn't have a briefcase. I had a backpack. Bought a briefcase. I had all my materials ready to go, and I go up for this interview. So I'm talking to the guy. We interview. Said, wow, it looks really good. I did the whole 3 GPA thing. He's shocked. He said, hey, what if you got a little bit more time, why don't you talk to so-and-so? So I talked to the next guy. An hour later, he said, wow, great interview. Wait 5 minutes. He came back and said, hey, are you free for lunch? I'm like, sure, I'm free for lunch. Why not stay for lunch? He said, well, hey, before lunch, we've got this little test. Would you mind taking this test? I'm like, test? He's like, oh, it's nothing. I mean, you've all had no idea. I'm completely blind, right? So I go in, take this hour-long test. I'm like, it's for like an ACT test. I'm smart enough. Came back and said, wow, hey, nice job on the test. So let's go to lunch. I go to lunch with these 3 guys. And, hey, do you have this? Sure, I got this afternoon free. So I ended up talking to these 2 director-level guys. And now we're into the day. And they've got the HR guy who manages everything, who makes the decision, says, okay, give us your receipts for the hotel. We're going to reimburse you. Thanks for spending the day with us. And so I gave him these receipts. He's like, you stayed at the Holiday Inn? I'm like, sure I did. And he looks over at the business guy. He's like, didn't we put him in the Omni in a suite? And he's like, no. He's like, so why did you? I said, well, it's my money. And so I drove up and stayed at the Holiday Inn. I drove in early. I got breakfast early, so I knew I was going to be here on time. And he's like, I cannot believe we put you through this process. And so he gave me back my $36, and I kind of went back in. So I get a phone call that night from my fraternity brother. He's like, Rick, you nailed it. I said, nailed what? He said, you went through an entire 6-month recruiting process in 1 day. I said, well, how'd that work? He said, well, they loved you in the interview. You scored one of the highest ever on the test. The directors loved your storytelling. You're an amazing storyteller. And then the fact that you got your own hotel room, he said, Rick, you're going to get an offer. The next week, I had an offer for $24,000. I mean, crazy money. Now, that entire story kind of matches up my life. I've never applied for a job that I didn't have someone tell me, you should apply for this because we're going to hire you. From my paper job to the mining supply job to my fraternity scenario, my job on campus, P&G, it was always this right time, right place. But I performed really well. And all that performance came into being confident, being at ease, being the storyteller, having a good enough GPA, everything in front of you. And the next thing you know, I'm working for P&G. I just knew they sold Tide and Crest. I had no idea what P&G did. Crazy.
Wow. And so how long did you stay at P&G?
17 years. Yeah,
Wow.
so I stayed.
And your salary was more than your salary was more than 21,000 that was predicted as you when you were back in
More than
Appalachia?
predicted, which is good. But I guess what's important in that scenario is 17 years of P&G, 10 of that was in the U.S. A pivotal moment for me was going international. So I worked 2 years in Hong Kong and a year in Bangkok. And the expat assignment was taking me from a corporate world of cubicles in Cincinnati to kind of the wild, wild west in Asia. And I became an entrepreneur all over again, really on P&G's dime, because I had from a territory from South Korea down to Australia, working across those territories. It was new business for P&G to be in those markets around from a customer's perspective, working with multinationals. So it was just craziness. And I learned a ton there. So that was one of the most pivotal moments of my corporate career was those 3 years in Asia.
And what was the catalyst for your move into entrepreneurship? I mean, didn't anybody warn you about being an entrepreneur?
Well, they did, and that's the hard part. So for me, once I went into Asia, spent some time, I knew there was no way I was going to go back to the corporate rigors. And people had told me, be careful going international because there's a decent chance you'll go work for another company or you're going to quit when you get back. And that was so true. I mean, you just had this adrenaline rush every day. Just, again, you're in Malaysia one day and you're in Bangkok the next. It's craziness. And people really needed you and you could impact change. I mean, you weren't pushing a little peanut, it's major change. And what I realized coming back in is I had a couple other friends, a guy by the name of Henry Ho and Bill Weitzman, who were with P&G. And P&G was looking for a couple thousand volunteers, primarily expats, to take a package and move on. My wife worked for P&G
Really?
as well. She was on a spousal leave with me. And, we were praying about this and said, gosh, if we both get a chance to ask for packages, why don't we give it a shot? And so sure enough, we said, we're not really sure that we want to do this, but let's at least make the effort, okay? At least make the effort and see if they're going to offer. And they did. And when they offered us the package, it was a 1 year salary plus medical, et cetera. And what we did, we used the company's package to be angel money for our startup.
Of course.
And then from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I had kind of a couple of different paths, but the path I chose was to continue to take the foundation of 17 years within CPG and the retail corporate America that I was in, and to build upon that foundation. So at least when I was engaging someone, I had amazing credentials, P&G. I had the international experience. I had the 17 years of corporate experience associated with it. So we built the entrepreneurial machine that we were driving. We built it upon our 17 years. And so that gave us a leg up as well.
And who thought of the new company and what was the company called?
The original company was called North Star, and it was a shopper marketing company that helped CPG companies sell into Walmart and other retailers from a shopper standpoint. Eventually, it was a shopper marketing, then went to shopper research. At one point in time, Yuval was managing 5 LLCs, distribution, brokerage, again, marketing, research. And all these were entities of selling into a Walmart or a Walgreens or a Target, but they weren't large enough to hire a major agency. And so we were working with the Fortune 100 to 500, not the Fortune 1 to 100. And as it started to drive, what we realized in around 2009, everything to scale this entrepreneurial business was all driven by where's Rick, where's Henry, where's Rick, where's Henry. We had to show up because they were waiting on us to consult, be the creative, to drive something. So it's really hard to scale. We had about 30 people at the time. But in order to scale this type of business, you had to hire pretty high level folks to scale again. So it's really difficult to make that happen. And what we realized in 2009, the iPhone 3S had just come out. Those are crazy days. This is pre-selfie days. So no front-facing camera, no video on the phone. And we were sitting around a table saying, I wonder if anyone's using this new iPhone to capture data inside of stores. And at that point in time, we're literally flying all over the US, Canada, capturing data, interviewing people in stores, and no one was doing that. And we sat down and said, we're going to be like the guys that said they invented Instagram, but we're just too busy to do it. We're going to look like fools at a party in about a year when someone else comes up with the idea of capturing data with a phone. So we started working nights and weekends again. We had been an entrepreneur for 9 years. running 5 LLCs, and we started working nights and weekends again to launch this thing called Field Agent. And we became the first app in iTunes to pay cash. That's hard to believe today that's the case, but you could get points, you could get badges, and we paid you cash. And we were the first app on iTunes to use metadata and geolocation to qualify data. It was almost like Asia again, the wild, wild west of mobile technology within retail. And then we realized we could actually scale this. They didn't need Rick in the room. Rick who? It really was a technology that could scale. And so 12 years later, we're in 7 other countries, 2 million downloads, and we're just driving this machine of this retail marketplace called Field Agent.
So same co-founders moved on with you?
No, we had, I called a breakup or divorce. Bill decided to move on to another avenue to kind of go down a different path. Henry and I have stayed together. We've been entrepreneurs together for 20 years and friends for almost 40.
So he's a co-founder.
Co-founder, that's correct.
Of Field Agent. So back in North Star, did you sell it off? What happened with North Star? Did it just dissolve?
It was interesting. So 2 of the LLCs had other owners in them. So one was kind of sold off, a little bit of sold off. One, we had a key employee that wanted to take the business. We got rid of 2, and the research firm my wife was running. And so Field Agent eventually acquired my wife, which is always interesting to tell folks. We made that acquisition.
I love that.
She was acquired. Research came in naturally. The other pieces kind of over here. So we had a couple small sales, but the really big one was the research company that Kim was a part of.
Mm-hmm. And so North Star, was it a success, an overnight success right away, or what happened with North Star right out of college, right out of P&G?
Yeah, so we were 10 days into one of the most colossal events that could happen. So we started the business. I left overseas. We came back, and we just adopted our youngest child from China. I had 2 birth children, Sarah, and we're moving in. I said, "Hun, I've got no car, no house, no job, but Daddy's going to take care of you as we come into Northwest Arkansas." Moved back in September 1st. Everything's ready to go. September 11th happens. We're on a flight. We get to Memphis. They cancel the flight. We're like, man, we're going to miss our very first client call. Very first, we're staying with friends so we're on the cheap, right? We don't have any money. We walk into a little cafe. Henry and I do. So, well, let's sit down and have a cup of coffee until we see when the flight comes back in. And we watch the second plane hit the World Trade Center. So our business started September 1st. Their first business call was September 11th. And for 6 months, no one was talking to anyone. I mean, we literally jumped in a rental car with a friend and drove back 6 hours from Memphis, listening to the whole world change on AM radio. It was crazy. So all the plans we had, all these great visions, we literally sat around for 6 months and had a lot of lunches and continued to vision. Now, that being said, you got to work hard, you got to prep. Other people didn't know what they're doing. So we had tremendous relationships we started to build, but there was no money changing hands. So now you've got to go to your father-in-law and say, well, that nice job that I had to take care of your daughter and your grandkids, it's not working out so well, but we're going to be okay.
Oh boy.
All your friends are like, are you going to come back to P&G? I'm like, no, we're not going to come back to P&G. We're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And after about 6 months, by really the spring, summer, things started to turn and we could see the light again. But it was a really hard startup. It's unlike anything you ever imagined, because you were living at that, through that phase. But imagine being 9 days into your startup. It was crazy.
Yeah, we have a similar path. I started Luvala, my skincare line, in 2006, 2007. And the 2008 financial crisis completely devastated my chances of success. But, like you, I don't believe Field Agent would exist without North Star, right?
Exactly right.
I think the same thing with ProMash. I wouldn't. So I don't look at Luvala and, losing my retail distribution in Luvala as failure. I look at it as just a transition over to the next stage on my path. Right. And I think that's the same way for you. So, when I started my first company, my wife, she's an actress, she was very supportive at the time. She was young. I was young. I was only 29 at that time.
Yeah.
But she had no fucking idea what she was getting into, you know? In turn, over the years, though, it got very difficult for her, I think. And I believe you were married when you started your first company, right? So how did your wife take it? Was she initially supportive? Did she change, you know, when she understood what was really, you know, taking place and what it really means to be an entrepreneur and birth a company from the ground
Yeah,
up?
so a couple of things for us. Number one, we were moving, we had lived in Florida for a few years, lived in Asia, and when we moved back to the States, we both moved into a location that we only knew 2 or 3 people. So no network, no engagement. We've got 3 young kids, new school, so it's all new. And I originally started out saying, hey, let's spend 2 or 3 years. Let's give it a couple of 3 years. Let's go drive it. I was coming in as the operations, the guy that's going to run the companies. Bill was more of the salesperson, great client face, really, really great with clients and understood the market. Henry's the strategy guy, was really mapping things out, again, great with clients. And I was running the machine, and I was running all these entities. So I thought that was going to be the case. So when Kim looked at it, it's like, listen, we could do anything. We just left Asia. We could do anything for a couple of 3 years. And then we started the machine and really grew to love this area, and everything was great. And so I'll take you to then 2008. So Kim started running the research company. She started coming back in part-time, and she was an integral part of that. All of our kids then were in school, so she's working part-time. And then 2008, 2009, Yuval, I represent The Big Short. Have you seen the movie The Big Short?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're looking at one of those guys. So Rick is one of these guys on your podcast here that in 2001 experienced 2011, 9/11. It's really, really bad. I also came through that financial crisis and had to file personal bankruptcy. So I'm one of these guys saying, hey, great. I didn't know that about Rick. I'm going to Google it and see what it says, right? And so what happened in our world, the business is rocking. Everything's great. I get a couple of buddies over here that said, listen, we've got this great piece of property. We're going to develop it. We were building a building at the time. So we're going to build a building for North Star, and we're going to drive this thing. He said, why don't you just sign up for like 10% of this property, and you could reap in that. We'll sell you a lot pretty cheap. It was great. About a year or so later, the real estate crisis happened. So I'm a 10% owner. The first developer went under. The second developer went under. And guess who's holding the bag? Right here.
Wow.
So now my building's worth X, and about every 3 months it was worth 10% less. And I'm trying to close on a construction loan. I couldn't close. More auditors were coming in, putting more pressure to put in more dollars to make the valuation right. The dirt went from $21 a square foot to 19 to 18 to 17 to 12 to 9, and we bought it at 10. Everything's underwater, and everybody wants a piece of me. And I'm like, whoa, I just remember those pictures of us at the ball game. Remember us with the golden shovel. Remember all the parties and the great courting that happened. Remember the documents we all signed. And like, we remember all that, but you signed for the 10%. These guys are gone. You now owe 100%. And I couldn't get out from under it. And then the more I engaged with people of faith, and then my bankruptcy attorney who said, Rick, you're a business person. You have no personal debt. You didn't take money and go to Puerto Vallarta. I mean, all the money went in dirt in a building. Try to turn the keys back in. Say, hey, you can have the building, have the dirt back. And we waited so long, and it was starting to affect the business because I'm taking every dime out I can to go pay this interest, that eventually said, we don't want the dirt. We don't want the building. We want your dog, your house, everything. And so
they went after you personally.
After person, you reach a point where I asked how my wife was doing. My wife is selling jewelry. We're selling cars. We're selling everything we can. And I've got really smart people, you've all saying, Rick, all roads lead to bankruptcy. Stop selling stuff. You're never going to get out from under this because the crisis was so bad, as you know. I mean, there was no money exchanging hands. This dirt was just sitting there, and the interest went from whatever percent. It almost doubled in interest because as the liability went up, the interest rate went up. So it was just a crazy, crazy time. And so had to now tell my mom and my father-in-law and mother-in-law and my brother and my aunt, hey, you're going to hear about this. We're filing bankruptcy. We're going to be able to figure out a way to keep our house. Kids and clothes are okay. We had to sell everything else we own. But the good news is, got my health, got my family, and the businesses are all rocking. So as you know, as bankruptcy comes in, the next day we recalibrated and launched new LLCs and started driving forward. But that was almost 10 years ago. Really, really hard time. And when you watch that movie, you realize Rick represented zero down. Everyone's your buddy. It was the easiest money in the world. I was a fool because I didn't stay focused on what I was good at, which is driving business. I was dabbling in real estate, and I signed things I should have never, ever signed. So lesson learned for me, but made it out okay.
So is that your advice to the entrepreneur out there? Stay in your lane?
Yeah, listen,
what's the advice?
I think it's to be significant, okay, you have to stay within your rails and head north, okay? Chasing shiny objects are really, really bad as an entrepreneur. And so I tell people all the time, it's like, listen, your rails can move maybe 5 or 10% here or there, but when you make an immediate right or left, I'm like, what are you thinking? I mean, anyone can chase shiny objects. You're trying to build something. So to build a brand, to build an enterprise, to build a team, you've got to stay within your rails. Now, there will be times you could start something new, but chasing shiny objects are bad. And so the example I give them, and once I tell the story of chasing real estate, the shiny object, their eyes are wide open. They're like, oh my gosh. I said, now take that same analogy where you're a great CPG brand and someone says, hey, why don't you get involved in this new marketing agency thing over here? I'm like, what are you doing? Hey, would you go invest in this real estate? Hey, would you go invest in this? I'm like, stop it. What do you know about food? Why are you opening a restaurant? I've got all this cash flow, man. I'm going to go open a restaurant. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's going to have my name on it. I said, stop chasing shiny objects. Stay in your lane and let that lane grow a little bit. Let clients drive you. So that's I preach that all the time with folks that I'm coaching, people that I'm mentoring.
I remember the time, and I think you'll relate to when I say this. This probably no worse feeling than sitting with your wife in front of a bankruptcy attorney.
I remember sitting there with her, and this guy looked at me. This was before we got the bankruptcy attorney. This is the banks coming at us. And it seems like I always do kind of the movie theme. So if you've ever watched Jerry Maguire, and the guy says, my word's as good as oak, man. You don't need a signature. And the guy looked at me and he said, hey, Rick, you said you're a good Christian guy and people should believe you. I see your signature right there. It looks to me like you're a liar. I'm like, whoa. I said, well, doesn't your word mean anything? And my wife's sitting there. And I said, you need to back that up, man. You need to back that up because your signature of your bank is there too. And he said, well, I'm just saying your signature should mean something. And I guess it doesn't. So I know what kind of person you are. I mean, that's how personal, those things are. Now, in fairness, he's the bad cop. The good cop would come in. I love you, man. And he was just doing his job because he was trying to get me to crack. So you take it personally, but you back up and realize it's nothing personal. I get what he was trying to do. But to sit there with your wife and she's looking at you saying, what have you gotten into? Now, you fast forward 10, 12 years. I'm a debt-free guy. I'm not signing anything. Really, really focused on what we have to do. And there's a freeing part of that. But 10 years ago, it was just way too good to be true. And when it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true.
Yeah, there are two moments that you'll never forget. Sitting in front of a bankruptcy attorney and the day that you have zero debt after you paid everything off.
I remember both of those
well.
Those
are two great days.
I remember them both well.
And I do as well. Yeah. So there are many entrepreneurs out there who are thinking, like you and I, to jump ship, to jump the corporate ship and start their own company. What advice, advice would you give them?
Yeah, I start out by saying that everyone thinks they have a really good idea. It's I'm so smart, I've got this idea, or I've been passionate about this. And it's that analogy of everyone thinks their baby is really cute, right? You got a beautiful baby. Listen, you and I both know that 90% of babies look like aliens. There's like 10% or 2% that are cute. And even they're still
Yes.
alien looking cute, right? There's very few cute babies, but
Yes.
everyone thinks they're cute. That's the same analogy that I use for businesses. I have this great business. I'm like, that's brutal, man. You think it's really good. So the first advice I give people is that if you think you have a good opportunity in front of you, the first thing you do is go to strangers, you pitch the idea. You can't keep talking to mom, dad, brother, good friend that would never tell you anything other than you're great. You got to go do that. The second thing is, and this is the best advice I was ever given you all, ever. Every entrepreneur needs to hear this one. We were getting ready to start. We're about a weekend before we made the big trip down. He said, listen to this. You are, as an entrepreneur, you are only as good as you invoice and collect. If you can't do that, you're starting an expensive hobby. And this is by Dr. Steve Graves, great advice. And so the second thing I tell people is that if you think you've got a good idea, you got your MVP, you got some product, if you can't convince a stranger to buy it, what makes you think this is anything other than an expensive hobby? So the two things. Number one, do not take your own advice. You got to get off the pedestal. You got to find a complete stranger to see what they think. And if they tell you, good idea, you take the feedback. If you can convince a total stranger to buy it, then I say, let's have a conversation. We'll figure out how to scale this thing. But most people say, look at my great idea. I need money to scale it. I said, have you sold it? No. Have you talked to any strangers? No. But man, look how cool this is. So those are the first two. The third piece is all else fails. If you truly believe you're solving a problem, then I think regardless of how the product looks, then I think it's worth having a conversation. Because even though your solution to the problem may not be the right idea, the fact that you know there's a problem to be solved and you're smart and you know that industry, like I came from CPG and I knew the problem I was solving, if you could stay within those rails of solving that problem and resist doing cute things, if you're willing to work, whether it's a month, 6 months down the road, you will eventually find a way to solve that problem. And then when that happens, get good advice from strangers and see if you can't sell it. So those are three core things that when I have a whiteboard, I take everyone through, and it makes a few people cringe and a few people never talk to me again because they don't want me to call their baby ugly.
Absolutely. I think that it was absolutely spot on, everything you just said. As an entrepreneur, hold on a second, just think the way I want to say it. Anyway, we'll go outside of that because I want to say something that was so good. Okay, hold on. I think I got it. It's about purchasing. Anyway, it's something about purchasing the product beforehand. Oh, okay, got it. Okay, so I got something for you. Here's the thing. As an entrepreneur, the really, really great ones don't sell the features of their MVP.
No.
The ones that go out and sell the value and solve a problem will understand the features over time. Right. If you build features, you're building a product. If you build value, your MVP can grow into a feature-rich product. And that's something that I've learned, over the years, especially as a salesperson, because as a founder, guess what? You're a salesperson.
You really are.
So that's what it is.
I tell you, along those same lines, it's difficult once you get started. And again, let's say if someone's coming to me with, hey, I've been selling for a while, and I've got this product, I'm trying to scale it. And this isn't for me. This is, pick a good book. 20 other people said this, but there's such a difference between a favor and a feature. And so you've got this product and you've got your 3 best clients and they keep asking for all these features. And I'm like, they're not asking for features. They're asking for favors because in their unique business proposition, they need you to change your product. That has nothing to do with scaling it to 10,000 other people. And they're like, oh, no, but I can take that feature and I can scale it. I said, have you talked to your other? Well, they don't need it, but somebody might need it. I said, no. It's okay for your best client to do a favor and call it that and be okay with it. But just because they ask for it doesn't mean you can scale it. A feature means that you've looked across a cohort and it meets the need or solves the problem for a cohort. And that's a key feature to drive your product. And I'm not saying don't do the favor, because if somebody represents 30, 40% of your volume, do some favors. And maybe you're lucky that it's a feature everyone needs. But the moment you understand that, like,
Yep.
oh, I've got to take care of my core client and keep doing favors. But that dev and those engineers working on that, I still have to go work on features for the masses. And so oftentimes we just assume our best clients, whatever they want, everyone else wants. And that's a common mistake I see with entrepreneurs, especially with products.
Brother, I've been there as someone that owns a tech company. Many arguments with the CTO and my co-founder, because as a founder and you're speaking on the sales side to clients, you want to solve their need. And you also believe that, wow, that's a great feature. Everybody's going to want to use it. And I can't tell you how many times we built a feature, spent tens or if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and literally 5 clients used it and no one else used it. So you're right. I love that. I love favor. That's fantastic. So let's switch topics a little bit. So I created the 7 hats to remind entrepreneurs to focus on other critical areas of their life so that they don't burn out, just trying to chase achievement without fulfillment. And I especially focus on hat number 2, the athlete, which is the health and wellness hat. I understand that you were one of those statistics and you crashed and burned at a very critical time in your business. So can you tell us about that time and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, so if you think about our journey into entrepreneurship, it was probably 7 years or so ago. It just had our Series A, then we had a follow-on investment from 5 Elms Capital. We had cash coming in. We're driving like crazy. Everything is scaling. We've expanded to a couple of countries. We're going from 12 people to 20 to 30 to 50. I mean, everything is changing. Organization is driving. And I had health issue A. Without getting into details, let's call it health issue A. And I had the doctor's nurse call me and said, "Hey, Rick, could you and Kim stop by this evening after hours? Dr. So-and-so would like to talk to you." She said, "Don't worry, it's not cancer." I went, okay. So I show up in his office with my wife. He's there with his partner and 3 nurses. They're all sitting in a room. And he looks at me and says, "Rick, Kim is here because you're not going to hear a word I say." I'm like, and he was a neighbor. I mean, I knew this guy. He's like, "Trust me." He said, "So Kim, I'm looking at Rick, but I'm really talking to you because he's not going to hear a word I say." He said, "Rick, you have this rare autoimmune disease." He said, "Autoimmune diseases can never be healed. We can manage symptoms." And I said, "Rick, I need you to listen. You're already not listening to me." Rick, he said, "Kim, what did I just say?" She said, "It'll never be healed." He said, "Right. For Mr. Entrepreneur Strategy, get it. Rick is not going to fix this." So I sat back in the chair. I'm like, "Oh, well, he said, "Listen to me, okay? Number 2, you're 1 in 1.2 million, and 70% of the people that have this are women. So there's like 90 active cases of this in the United States. So no one's working on this. No one's studying it. No pharma company cares because there's 300 people and you're one of 90 guys. No one cares." I'm like, "But Rick, you can Google it. I'm just telling you, no one cares." Okay. Number 3, he said, "Let's talk about your lifestyle." He said, "I know you pretty well." He said, "Are you getting enough sleep?" I was like, "Oh, yeah." And Kim's like, she's rolled her eyes. And I said, "Well, I get plenty of sleep." He said, "Well, describe your evening." I said, "Well, I go home at 5:30 or so. I have dinner at home every night with Kim and the kids. I never missed a dinner unless I was traveling. Go out and maybe do sports, whatever. We come back, we do homework. Kim's go to early bed. Then I kick in around 10 o'clock for that second win because I'm a second win kind of guy. Worked around 12 or 1. Get up the next day, 6 o'clock, go work out, get the day started." He went, "Those days are over." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "They are over. Number 1 is that this autoimmune thing kicks in. Lack of sleep creates stress. You're done. You're going to get at least 7.5, preferably 8 hours of sleep a night." And I said, "That's over." He said, "Rick, you're not listening to me. Kim, he's going to start getting 8 hours of sleep. He's going to go to bed." And I said, "Okay." So he said, "Are you stressed?" I'm like, "Oh, no." She's like, "Oh, my gosh. Stressed?" He's completely stressed. I said, "I'm not stressed." He went, "Rick," he said, "stress causes this. So lack of sleep and stress makes you sick, and the autoimmune kicks in if boom, boom, and boom." He said, "You're not listening?" So all that we had a few more questions, but we finished that session. So now I have to go to my board of directors, my partners, and say, "Here's the reality. I can't keep cranking the hours that I was cranking. I've got to step back. This isn't going to kill me, but it's going to make my life miserable. And a couple of them were like, well, we were wondering when you were going to, realize that you couldn't keep burning it the way you are. Then about a year or so later, autoimmunes run in pairs. I had a second one, completely unrelated, but second. Then I had a third autoimmune. And they were all, so I was still, I was getting healthier, but all that being said, it took about 3 years. And finally I realized I've got to lose weight. And I was not bad, but I've got to sleep. I've got to start eating, and I've got to reduce the stress, or I'm not going to live a long, healthy life. And what it also allowed me to do by having that kind of crisis, health crisis in front of me, it allowed me to build a team in a different way. It allowed me to actually be able to come in and be able to delegate and encourage others. And so it was a net win for everyone, but it was just the reality that was in front of me.
Wow. And did you set up some sort of routine, evening routine, morning routine in order to help you?
Yeah.
Or were you winging it?
I'm a process guy, creature of habit. And so if you looked on my phone right now at 9:30, it says, get ready to go to bed. I'm like, really? Because mentally, I'm like, okay,
Nice.
You got to get ready. So by 10 o'clock, I'm approaching. By 10:30, I'm asleep. And then I'm up by 6:30. I'm trying to get that 8 hours in. So little simple things like that. But I guess more importantly, as you think about the process of being healthy, I looked at health as I'm working out, running, biking. I could take on the world. I didn't look at the mental health and the sleep or the stress related health as being a complete healthy Rick. It was really more of I could run, walk, compete with the best of them. And I realized that was not going to be the long term, because when you go from 45 to 50, then 55, you realize, gosh, that's not at all what complete health is. Complete health is mind and body and soul. And I just wasn't looking at it that way, because I thought I can outrun, outlive, outwork, because that was my background as a kid, right? You work hard, you work harder than the next guy, and you just realize you can't keep burning that way and be the best self you can be.
Yeah. To all the seven hatters listening, Rick and I have been there. So we're just going to start there. And for all of you thinking that, oh, I'm just going to grind for the next 5 years, get the business up and, make a bunch of money and then take care of my health or my finances or my spiritual connection or myself. Don't do it, please, because you're never going to get there. And when you do, you'll feel completely unfulfilled, and it's hard to start later. Do it now. Find some time. You said something that's really awesome to me, which I now quote all day long. I asked you, is there such a thing as a balanced work-life balance? And you said, no, there's no such thing as balance. What did you say?
There's no such thing. It's that if you look at the seesaw teeter-totter of life, is that I think I have this work-life balance and I have crisis at home. Therefore, home takes the seesaw up. Wait a minute, there's a crisis at work, it takes the seesaw. So there's no such thing as balance. The opportune way to look at this is that how can I engage in a way that when the seesaw goes up and down, I have the right processes, margin, capacity to handle the ups and downs. Because a completely flat life, A, is unobtainable, and B, who wants to live that life? I mean, you want to live the high of highs of your family, and my daughter gets married and I want to go sway over here, and I'm way over focused on the marriage, and I'm way over focused on my grandkids, and I'm way over focused on the Series A with the business, and I'm way over focused on the launch. Well, those ebbs and flows are fantastic. And people are like, oh no, you should have equal balance. I said, well, first of all, it's not two things, it's like 10 things. Well, then you should juggle it. So that's ridiculous. So there's no such thing as balance. It's being a part of the balancing, and you need to have enough margin to go after it. So I tell, especially young guys that have a family, I talk about making deposits into the emotional bank account of life. And this happened with my wife. And I realized pretty quick is that if I didn't have enough deposits in the emotional bank account with her, when I was an idiot, had to work late hours, I had to have something to pull from, right? And eventually when that deposit goes from 10 to 9 to 8 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 0, she's looking at me like, you've done nothing to pour in over here. And I realized, oh, that was
Yep.
bad. So the deposits of emotional bank account for your team, for your board, for your friends, your family, your spouse, you've got to be able to make those deposits over time, because when you have to chase after the seesaw that goes down, and you'll have a crisis at work. My wife had breast cancer, thought I was going to lose her. And for months when she was going through chemo, my team rallied around me. I had one focus in life, was to make sure my wife wasn't going to die. She was going to be okay. But I have invested so much in the team that I was pulling from those deposits. Everything was okay. So those crises will happen in life. You just can't be all things to all people. So the balancing thing is ridiculous. It'll never happen.
It's a balancing act, and only someone who's been sucking their thumb in fetal position, crying on the bathroom floor many, many times could actually verbalize what you just said. So speaking of sucking your thumb in fetal position, let's talk about the black swans in the room. So you've braved through 9/11, the financial meltdown, and of course, our friend COVID. How did each impact you and your business? And what did you learn from each of those experiences?
Yeah, I think the 9/11, since it happened so early in my career as an entrepreneur, I think it taught me the fortitude, or the willingness to stay, the steadfastness to know that I knew the idea was right. And no matter who I talked to, strangers said, yes, what you're building is solving a solution. And therefore it gave me the patience and the stamina to weather the storm before we even got started. I think had the idea been wishy-washy and kind of interesting, listen, 30 days later, I'd have quit, taken a job, and provided for my family. But I knew in my heart of hearts, and I knew practically after talking to people, the right thing to do. So that's how it impacted me, is that for the right thing, stay the course. It's going to be the right thing, at some point in time. I think the financial crisis was just your bankruptcy attorney looking at you as like, you idiot. You're excellent at what you do. Who told you you're a real estate mogul? And I just realized, which is why I use the shiny object piece, is that I knew better. It was one of those when your parents say, well, you're going to touch it. It's hot. Don't touch it. It's hot. And you touch it. You're like, oh my gosh, I just scalded my hand. And your mom says, I told you it was hot. And so I just realized, man, I'm never going to let, and I say never such a long time, you all, but I'm not going to allow that to happen again. I'm going to stay away from those shiny objects because I know better. And that reinforced as an adult that I'm not invincible, that it is going to burn me. Boom. You fast forward kind of into this COVID area, this COVID time. I think if I've learned anything over this time is that having a business and a culture that is healthy allows you to move and navigate a new world. Had we not been healthy, both financially and from a culture standpoint, I don't know how we would have lived through it, because if we've learned anything over COVID, it's easy to manage work remotely. It's hard to maintain and manage and grow a culture. And so what we benefited from is have really, really strong culture, manage through that. And now that we come out on the other side of it, now we're saying, gosh, we're going to continue to grow and expand versus having to start all over. I don't think we could have done that had we not been strong financially and strong from a culture standpoint, because either one of those I've seen would just kind of break companies because they just can't maintain what they have to do, because we've realized that this COVID thing, and it's not my analogy, it's another analogy, but that COVID wasn't a snowstorm. It wasn't an ice storm. COVID is an ice age. And an ice age says there's ice in Antarctica and Newfoundland and Iceland that wasn't there 10 million years ago because it was the tropic. With COVID relating to working remote, understand how people are going to buy, how they're going to engage, it's an ice age, which means until we have another catastrophic event, I don't think things are going to change, because I thought it was a snowstorm. I hoped it was an ice storm. this is an ice age. And so we're having to learn to move from that. But thank goodness we had a good culture and good business behind of it.
Yeah, I so relate because you and I are in the same industry. We actually have very, very similar products out in the market. We do different things, but it's in the same space. So COVID potentially for at least 12 months or even 18 months decimated the events industry, the retail industry. Nobody was going out and taking photos and asking, for secret shoppers.
No.
I mean, all of that was completely decimated. And I agree. If you and I did not have a culture that was exceptional, we would have lost the best people on our team. And you know what? They stayed, they fought with us. We were all in it together, and now we're just stronger on the other side. So God bless you. But it's funny because you said, the ice age and the catastrophe that's coming again. It's going to come again. So what advice do you have for those that maybe haven't experienced the next black swan, right? That currently maybe just starting their business. They know that terrible things happen, but they haven't experienced running a business through a calamity like that. So what would you say would be your advice to someone who's going to be looking for the next black swan? It's coming for sure, guys. Just remember that.
So let's talk about the new person starting out that is putting everything they own. They sold everything. All their savings they're putting into this egg, or they're putting into this opportunity, right? It's put all your eggs in one basket. I tell them that you cannot live waiting for the next black swan. You have to lean in and you have to drive just like nothing's going to happen. Because if you don't and you keep wondering and preparing, you are not an entrepreneur. Go back and get a job. Don't do it. I mean, you cannot live your life wondering. You're going to stress out and you're never going to be all in because I need a backup. An entrepreneur, in most cases, you don't have a backup. I mean, you are leaning in and this is what you're focused on. So that would be advice number one. You got to be okay. And if it all falls apart, go get a job and be okay with it. But you've got to be all in. Then you get the folks that have been up and running for 2 or 3 years. They're finally starting to scale. Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I think planning is important. You've got to be prepared to ask the hard questions that if the machine stalled, if the black swan happened, what can I do to either right size, right price, right whatever, so that I can sustain my business through this turbulent time? And it's the question that no entrepreneur wants to hear. No one wants to hear about downsizing. No one wants to hear about, well, I have to change my model. No one wants to hear about, I have to take my pricing down to where no one's going to get paid anything. I reduce salaries by 20%, and you have to think, plan for it, because that's this. You're expecting your glass half empty guy, but I'm saying you have to understand that when it happens, if you're working on the right thing, it's the right vision, it's the right model, and you just have to survive. You have to realize the entity needs to survive, and you've got to make really, really tough decisions, and you got to be prepared for that. And then there's the one that's just soaring along, driving like crazy. My encouragement there, and we were able to do this in a couple of cases, be prepared to reach out to those in need around you and be able to provide. So you got a cleaning company, keep paying the cleaning company. You got to keep doing that. You have 4 other service providers. Negotiate a deal to where you don't go to zero, because your business is still real tight. And how do you keep providing services there? You're not going to go back in your building. Work with your landlord. I mean, those are the kind of things that if you're robust enough, giving and helping other services and services providers around you. If you're catering in once a week for your employees, you're buying snacks from the local guy, how can you have those delivered to someone's home? I mean, that's giving back. So there's really 3 entities: starting up, kind of early on in the process, and someone that's really rocking over here. I think in each one of those cases, we have roles we can play.
Such wise advice. I think, Rick, we covered, I think, every hat out of the 7 during this interview. So I'd like to close out my interviews with the following question. Who did you have to stop being, and who did you need to become to manifest your current success?
I had to stop being the knower. I'm right. I would argue if you look at whether you're taking a strengths test and I can see things, you can look at an Enneagram test, a Myers-Briggs. I truly believe that God has allowed me to see things, and I can be in a creative session or a strategy session, and I can just see where we need to go. The problem with that is everyone just sits around waiting for Rick to speak. You're not building capacity. You're not building anything. And so what I've learned to do is that there are opportunistic times that I still need to be the guy in the front of the boardroom, in front of the screen, in front of the whiteboard, making the decisions and driving it. The person that I had to become was more of an encourager to realize that my words are like 1,000 pounds. And I have to back that up, even to the point if I'm using my hands now. When I get into meetings today, I will literally sit on my hands. And when I get ready to talk and I feel my hands, it's telling me, why do you need to solve that problem right now? Stop it. Let the team is going to end up in a good place. Now, there are times I have to jump in and say wrong when we're not going down that path, right? But what I've learned over time to the person I've become, I'm much more of an encourager than a knower telling. Now, I still default, and people will tell you, oh, Rick, he's going to tell us what we need to do. But I try to back that off, and I think it's made me a more well-rounded leader. But at the same time, not using my gift is unfair to the team because that's why they came to the company. That's why we're going down this path. And that's why the investors gave us cash, because Rick and Henry were driving this machine. But I got 100 people right now. And I need the 100 people to be on top of their business, to feel autonomous, to go drive. And so that's been really, really hard for me. But I've done a better job, A, because of my health. Okay. I've had to do it. And B, I've realized in order to scale this thing the way we need to scale it, I've got to back off and quit being the guy it's in front of the room all the time.
I love that. Tell the Seven Hatters what you're currently up to and where they can connect with you.
I'm a LinkedIn guy. I'd love to say jump on social media, but if it's not a birthday or anniversary, I'm probably not on social media that much these days. Get me on LinkedIn. It's Rick West. If I'm the field agent guy, it's easy to find me. DM me. Would love to talk. You'd be surprised how quickly I would respond and strike up a conversation, you've all just like this, whether it's on business or life. Would love to come alongside someone and be able to give back in that way. And then obviously from a business standpoint, we have a great marketplace that solves retail solutions. If you got problems, it solves retail problems. We're solutions. Go to fieldagent.net, shop around a little bit. Would love to hear what you think about our marketplace. And would love to help out.
Rick, it was a pleasure having you on the Seven Hats. I know you and I are going to continue building this relationship, and I will do everything I can to promote and expose your baby, your pretty baby now, because you don't have 100 team members unless your baby is pretty. So congratulations on all your success. Thank you for wanting to give back and help entrepreneurs do better. And I look forward to continuing our relationship. Thanks again for the Seven Hats.
Until next time. Thanks, man.